Start, sir.
Should I start?
Yes.
Yeah. Good morning, friends, and welcome to the session on global economic slowdown. How should India respond? I think this becomes my humble duty to thank our institute, especially the Committee on International Affairs, Dr. Thatte and Mr. Yogender, for organizing this interesting, useful session for all of us. We all have been going through the corona pandemic, facing it, simultaneously trying to conduct business as usual, and we have been using a phrase, a new normal. But let me tell you, the global economic slowdown actually started in the year 2007 or say 2008, when we saw the American economy collapsing with its internal problems, both operational and structural. So let us not blame corona alone for the economic slowdown. Yeah, agreed that corona added to the complexity of economic slowdown. There are various versions, definitions, interpretations of the slowdown. Is it totally structural or operational? Is it very long term or just a corona-led kind of a slowdown? Will it lead us to recession, leading further to depression and whatnot? But then there are quite a few interpretations which also talk about the story of revival. Friends, let us start with a very quick discussion. The global economic slowdown, how it is clear to us and what are the indicators of the global economic slowdown. Most of them are known to us, but I'm just doing a kind of a revision for all of us. Number one is serious reduction in global trade. If you look at the numbers published by WTO, we find that there is almost 27 to 30% reduction in global trade. It is not just a problem between China and America alone, but it is a global problem. Number two, average rate of growth in GDP has declined to 1.5%. When I say average, it is the global average. So in US and European countries, it may be something between 2 and 2.5%. In India, there is always a guess before Corona that it was 5.5 to 6%. And now we all know that there is a negative growth in our GDP during last 4 to 5 months as such. Number three, substantial increase in national debt compared to national GDP. In almost 90% countries, if I say so, including the underdeveloped, developing and developed nations, the amount of national debt compared to national GDP is really alarmingly very large. And therefore, the debt trap is on. The fourth indication is loss of jobs in 90% countries. Loss of jobs in 90% countries, say in USA around 11%. During Corona in India, there is a guesswork. It may be something between 12 to 15%. But then the loss of jobs was there before Corona in India, something between 7 to 9%. Serious increase in economic migrants. We know that there are political migrants, there are cultural migrants, but suddenly you find a substantial increase in economic migrants, especially among the European countries. Even with the exit of Britain, we find that the economic migrant number has gone up considerably. So is the case within India. If you look at Indian economy, which is a subcontinental kind of an economy, the increase in economic migrants from the underdeveloped states to the developed states has always been increasing and always being very high. Increase in unused production capacities around 50%. As an impact of economic slowdown, in almost all countries, there is a serious reduction in the use of production capacities to the tune of around 50%. Even in a country like China, you look at their steel manufacturing capacities, mining capacities, construction capacities, there is a 40 to 50% reduction. And therefore, Chinese economy, which is mainly export oriented, export based, is in a real dilemma today. Considerable decrease in tax revenue in almost all countries. Tax revenue, both direct and indirect. Naturally, economic slowdown is nothing but reduction in economic activism and therefore reduction in tax revenue. And therefore, most of the governments of developing nations are not able to spend on developmental projects as such. 30% decrease in bank lending. 30% decrease. Okay, bank lending is also, is also going down, not just for a reason that there are no good borrowers, also that there is a chaotic kind of a situation. Bankers are also in a dilemma about their yesterday's non-productive assets, NPAs, recovery, and therefore, in most of the countries, bankers are taking a very conservative approach in their lending business. Substantial decrease in average purchasing power of 90% of people. If I take American example, in last 12 to 15 years, average salary of middle class Americans, lower middle class Americans has been revised only by around, I would say, 0.5% per annum, whereas the rate of inflation over there has been around 2%. So there is a substantial decrease in average purchasing power of 90% of people, right from India to China, China to USA, USA to, I would say, Japan and so on. Decrease in household saving and capital formation. As a result of average purchasing power going down, average salaries going down, naturally, there is a decrease in household saving and capital formation. Friends, we all know a substantial amount of economic dependence the country to raise capital and spend on infrastructure is always with public money, public saving, because public saving is not less than 50 to 60% of capital formation. So capital formation with internal saving is much more better than capital formation through direct foreign investment or the international borrowings. Now friends, if these are the indicators of global economic slowdown, let us quickly look at the reasons for this economic slowdown. Indicators we know, we have been watching them, but what are those reasons, both long-term, short-term, structural, operational? Let us have a quick look at these reasons. Number one, which I find is a big serious reason for economic slowdown, is an imbalance or disequilibrium of the economic sectors. Now, in economic theory, we all know traditionally there are three sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, and service sector. There is a disequilibrium among these three sectors. Economists have been talking about new technology sector, nanotechnology sector, now artificial intelligence sector. So the economic sectors need not be three, they could be 4, 5, 6, 7 also. But there is a disequilibrium among these economic sectors, and that I call it as a serious structural flaw. If you remember, if you observe, there has been an overemphasis on the service sector much more than manufacturing. Investment in manufacturing sector has been going down consistently. So if you don't invest in manufacturing sector, infrastructure, naturally the GDP gets impacted, job creation gets impacted, research and development also gets impacted. The second reason is regional imbalance as a result of geopolitical conflicts. Whether it is the Asian continent or African or American, we find that there are geopolitical conflicts. They are there between China, Japan, China, South Korea, or Russia and the neighboring countries, or to some extent between USA and Mexico, within the South American countries, African countries, and the geopolitical conflicts, they have badly impacted global trade. Now, the third reason is flawed mechanism of World Trade Organization. I've been saying this, I've been writing about this, that the WTO mechanism is trade based and not manufacturing based. WTO prescribes and executes common laws, common rules for all the countries. Although country-wise economies are different, you can't compare the economy of Japan or America against the economy of Ethiopia or economy of Brazil, or for that matter, economy of India. So WTO mechanism is based on the concept of survival of the fittest and not survival of the weakest. Therefore, we find that the WTO mechanism recently has been failing and is not supportive of revival of global trade. The fourth reason is crony capitalism and serious increase in the rich-poor gap, that is concentration of capital resources in a few hands. You remember there was a huge hue and cry on the Wall Street of USA, and there was also a slogan that you are one and we are 99. This was a very clear indication of the impact of crony capitalism on American economy. In last couple of years, we find crony capitalism and crony capitalists being very active in this part of the Asian continent also, be it India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Nepal, or whatnot. So crony capitalism and crony capitalists, there is nothing against capitalism as long it is not crony. It is not, I would say, coercive, and it doesn't concentrate power in a few hands. But unfortunately, that has been happening, and that has also impacted the global economy. Overall stagnation in the field of innovation and faulty management of change. Let me tell you, during last 3 decades, there was no breakthrough innovation, barring some service areas, information technology areas, in a great economy of USA. There was no innovation. There was no enough innovation in Japan. Forget innovation in India. The patent applications made for innovation in America and China are around 15 to 20 times of the applications made in India. So a country that doesn't innovate regularly, naturally it impacts its GDP, it impacts its economic activism. Stagnated incomes of middle and lower middle class people. We recently, we just said about it, and that is there a problem with 90% of the countries. Why? Because in the pursuit of shareholder wealth appreciation, many multinational companies, global companies, quite a few reputed Indian companies have not been paying well to the employees from middle and lower middle class classes. The next reason is neglected efforts in agriculture. We all know in last 15-16 years, the rate of growth in agriculture in India is hovering between 2.5 to 3%. Actually, Corona has taught us a big lesson that more than manufacturing and servicing, what is perpetually important for all of us to survive is agriculture. Quite a few friends of mine from Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, are thinking back to go down to small towns and villages and get into some kind of agricultural activity, which was absolutely neglected, professionally neglected, financially neglected, innovatively neglected, not only in India, but many other countries. Mismatch between industrial growth and growth in employment. As I just said 5 minutes back, in a country where there is no industrial growth, there is no growth in employment. And this is very evident in USA also. It is evident in Germany. It is evident in Britain, evident in France, and naturally it is evident in India also. Look at the manufacturing sector growth in India has been very negligible. Some quarters it was negative. So manufacturing sector creates good amount of jobs. It creates a big value chain where ancillaries, vendors, small SMEs depend on the manufacturing sector, depend on the OEMs, and that entire value chain, that entire big chain creates direct employment, indirect employment, remote employment, even in villages and talukas, tehsils also. But that is not happening. Then misplaced priorities in many economies. I call it consumerism. Friends, in my earlier session, I made a mention about I being a president of Mumbai Grahak Panchayat in my suburban area. And we made some kind of analysis. Not only in developed countries, but in developing nations like India, there has been a misplaced priorities. Misplaced priorities on the part of the government also. What we need as necessities was forgotten. Again, unfortunately or incidentally, Corona taught us what are our necessities, what should be our spending levels, how should we save, what exactly we need. So economies of India, for that matter, even China recently, economies of Brazil, Argentina, and elsewhere, there have been misplaced priorities, and those have been leading to a lot of consumerism of the rich, and I would say ultra rich, semi-rich, portion of our population. So consumerism to some extent is required. It is required with an equal degree at all the levels of the political strata, and that is not exactly happening in countries like India. So unless until a poor person consumes, spends enough, there is no economic activism. In India, there is no enough money in the hands of poor people for various reasons which are known to us. So naturally, if 60% people in India do not spend enough in the markets, okay, there is no demand in the market, naturally that leads to slowdown. And the last reason is socio-political degeneration in almost all countries. Sorry to make a reference here. Look at the leadership of Mr. Trump from USA, leadership of Mr. Abe in Japan, leadership of Mr. Xi in China, leadership of Israel, leadership of many such countries. If you refer to them, what we find in almost all countries, there is a socio-political degeneration, deterioration. Okay, leaders have been now unnecessarily emphasizing excess of nationalism, something which is in Hindi called Rashtravad. Nationalism, okay, is if it is okay in the interest of the country, but should not be at the cost of other countries, interest of other countries. So excessive nationalism has been politicized, and therefore Mr. Trump makes a statement that we don't need WTO, we don't need to transact with China. India is not doing well with us. We want to ban imports from Mexico and so on. If these are the statements of the head of a powerful country, you can imagine what amount of socio-political degeneration has happened in our global economy, globe as such. Friends, these are the major reasons for global economic slowdown. Now I take you to a very important discussion. If these are the indicators of global economic slowdown, and these are the reasons which are structural, operational, financial, political, technological, cultural, how do we respond to them? On one side, our corona patient number is increasing. I am told very recently, I mean yesterday or day before, we have already surpassed Brazil. We are now on number 2 in terms of corona cases. We have more number of what you call temples and all those places of God worshipping kind of a thing. Temples are many more than hospitals and dispensaries in a country like India. And corona has proved that, unfortunately. But then we will overcome corona. We'll get some kind of a treatment to corona, right? We are all hopeful, maybe by December, maybe by January. But then the long drawn problem of global economic slowdown, as I mentioned to you, we started in the year 2007-8. Actually, if you get into a very deep root cause analysis, if you ask me, my very honest opinion is global economic slowdown, its beginning could be seen in the year 1999 to 2000, especially in the developed nations. The developed countries resorted to WTO in the year 94-95, okay, to boost their own economies. Their own economies started slowing down, okay, in early 90s, and therefore the powerful developed nations thought that there should be a mechanism called WTO. We should design the rules in such a way that we are able to boost our GDP, our economies, probably at the cost of developing economies, underdeveloped economies. But then to the fortune of countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, China, we all developing nations learn the tricks of the trade within the WTO mechanism very soon. We learn them in 3-4 years, including our politicians, trade dealers, trade leaders, our bureaucrats, and all other members from countries like us. We learned the WTO trick so well, so nicely, that we started giving back to the powerful developed nations. And then if you remember, in the year 2007-8, we started observing the symptoms of economic slowdown, especially in developed nations, both from the American continent and the European continent. In European continent, within the European Union kind of a mechanism, we find barring Germany, except Germany, all other economies are not doing well. And unfortunately, they have been blaming the mechanism of WTO. They have been blaming the aggression of China. They are blaming, okay, the aggression of India, aggression of Brazil, and many such developing nations. Now, friends, on this background, let us talk very practically, with all due pragmatism, how should India respond to the global economic slowdown? Friends, what I have done here, for the ease of discussion, for the ease of understanding, appreciation, analysis, I have divided the responses into two parts. What should be our internal responses within India, which is very important, and what should be our external responses. I just make a quick statement here. Before Corona started, before we got into the Corona problem, we all know that the impact of demonetization on rural economy, semi-urban economy in India was very serious. Number one, we did demonetization with a good purpose, but with a very bad preparation. Then came the execution of GST. One country, one tax. Yes, very genuine concept. But again, that was not with complete preparation as such. When I say complete preparation, it's understanding, revisions in its clauses, infrastructure availability, internet availability, understanding of the SMEs, okay, and many other aspects of the GST execution as such. We did a good amount of reforms in the bankruptcy laws. I would also say banking structure, a good kind of activism in terms of NPA recovery. But then on the other side, as I said earlier, manufacturing was neglected, agriculture was again neglected, there was no growth in service sector, and then we found that once upon a time when our rate of growth in GDP was around 9 to 10%, it came down to 7.5%, then 6.5%, and now before Corona it was between 5.5 to 6%. I am not talking about the Corona period. I am talking about the overall global economic slowdown and therefore our responses. So friends, let us go to the internal responses, which I think are very important for a subcontinent like India. So number one, which is foremost, is increase in purchasing power and consumption by middle class and poor people. Increase in purchasing power. Now, how do you increase this purchasing power? Okay, by paying them good remuneration, good earning. Now, when I say middle class and poor people, it mainly includes the unorganized sector of Indian workers, very small, tiny SMEs, like the small kirana walas from villages and talukas. They're also in a very bad shape. Why? Because who is their consumer? Their consumer is a lower middle class or a poor customer who doesn't have purchasing power. If it doesn't have purchasing power, naturally it would impact a small kirana wala from a tahsil, taluka or a village also. How do we enhance their purchasing power? How do we empower them to spend enough, to save enough? That is, if you ask me, the first or foremost priority as part of our response to global economic slowdown. We are a big country of 135 crore people, but out of 135 crore people, if we calculate 60%, there is around 80 crore people are middle class, semi-middle class, and very poor. So unless we improve their purchasing power through infrastructural projects, government will have to look at its budget and spend more on infrastructural projects, which will create good amount of, I would say, would generate good amount of employment at taluka, tehsil level and village level. Would also strengthen the local economic activism. Fortunately or incidentally, Corona has demonstrated that to us. Therefore, we have been looking at our local area kirana walas, okay, local area small SMEs, and we have been also looking at the small farmers from villages and tehsils. But unless until we increase their purchasing power and their own consumption, okay, we will not be able to reduce economic slowdown in our country. The second solution, the second response should be activate local economies by financing the SMEs and domestic needs. Our respected Prime Minister many a times made a statement that bankers should look at social lending seriously. Bankers should look at the cause, intention, and not at collaterals and securities offered by the SMEs. Now, this has been well said, but not well implemented by most of our bankers. They be from the private sector, nationalized bankers, cooperative bankers, foreign bankers, scheduled bankers, and whatnot. So we have to finance the local SMEs and domestic needs, and that requires a different banking approach. I agree that banking business cannot be done with growing NPAs. I fully agree. But then there should not be excess of conservatism in banking, in lending. Look at the Grameen banking concept of Bangladesh. Professor Muhammad Yunus brought it to Bangladesh. He created a very nice business model where 5 women entrepreneurs, they stand guarantee to each other, and therefore there is no NPA. These 5 women entrepreneurs in a group, they monitor, they watch, they supervise the use of those finances done by a bank for productive reasons. Now that model, why should not we think about applying to Indian SMEs, local domestic needs? So we have to reform the local banking structure, financing structure a lot. Unless we do that, we will not be able to activate domestic, local, regional economies, or I would use the word economic activism. The third response is execute the law stringently to crush crony capitalism. And what is that? Improve the investigation into bankruptcy cases. Okay, those borrowers, especially big industrial houses who have been borrowing and with a lot of what you call crony capitalist kind of innovation, have been creating bankruptcies, looting their own companies. Now that has impacted our banking sector so badly, as we all know. The amount of NPAs done by industrial houses, big corporates, if you ask me, around 80 to 82% of the total lending done by Indian government banks or nationalized banks. So how do we look at bankruptcy, recovery of NPAs, restricting monopolies? There are many more monopolies growing in almost all areas. I don't want to isolate or blame a few industrial houses, be it information technology, communication technology, supply of seeds and fertilizers to agriculture, petroleum based products, automobiles. You take a sector and we find that there is a growing number of monopolies, cartelization, cartelling. Now this also will have to be checked very seriously, and of course tax evasion. These are all the components of our quick response, our stringent response to crushing crony capitalism. And if you ask me, again, I am not just talking about India, the problem is same worldwide, be it crony capitalism in the USA or Venezuela, Brazil, or for that matter, Japan to China. Of course, the methods differ, the respondents differ, the structure differs, but crony capitalism is omnipresent. Our fourth response should be improve ease of conducting business and clean up the bureaucratic system. Our respected Prime Minister has been talking about Make in India, Startup India, Innovative India, New India, Strong India. Now, this is all possible unless we improve ease of conducting business. Quite a few of friends of mine from American companies, Chinese companies, German, and I would say even British companies, they find very difficult conducting business in India. There's a very recent case that foreign companies situated on the belt between Mumbai and Pune, Pune and Kolhapur in South Maharashtra, Pune and Aurangabad in North Maharashtra, they all went and complained to the district collectors that we do not enjoy any ease of conducting business. The execution of labor laws, clearances offered by the bureaucratic system, raising capital and the processes of raising capital, banking laws. There are several issues. Okay, and these several issues are, they have become such hurdles in our process of conducting business. So it has been said, well said, if you succeed in conducting business in India, you are eligible conducting business anywhere in the world. Now, this what talks about the ease of conducting business in India. And this requires great infrastructure, less legislation, but then at the same time, accurate execution of legislation. The fifth response to global economic slowdown is spend at least 6% of the budget on education, especially professional education, education that creates jobs give jobs, makes our youth eligible for getting jobs. In the industry, when I talk to corporates, they do not get even good ITI diploma holders. Forget engineering diploma holders. When I say good, I'm talking about their theoretical skills, not even practical skills. The corporate world in India has accepted a decade back that Indian technical institutes are okay to give theoretical inputs and not so much of practical exposure or practical inputs. Therefore, almost every company in India, when the diploma holders join a company, okay, there is always a great amount of training given to them. But then that theoretical training is also not happening. Why? Because government of India doesn't spend enough on primary education, secondary education, skill-based education. There is a government support required. On the contrary, we have been talking more and more of privatizing the processes of education, imparting education. We all agree, we all know that privatization is normally based on the concept of profit making, and that leads to profiteering. So there is a government business, government's intervention that is required in education for all. But what I find, unfortunately, year after year, the percentage of budget that we spend on education, okay, is going down. It was once upon a time around 4%. It is now not 4%. We need at least 6% of the budget to be spent on education, capability building as we call it. It is our long-term investment. On one side, when we say 59 to 60% of our population is young, is very productive compared to China and Japan, but where is their capability? Unless we offer their capability, make up in India, produce in India, India should be a global manufacturing hub, won't happen. The sixth response is create jobs by spending more on public infrastructure and support manufacturing sector. I already made a reference to this when I spoke about local economic activism. A lot of spending is required on public infrastructure in India. When I say public infrastructure, it also includes public education, hospitals. It includes roads and canals, irrigation, water management. It includes safety and security of villages and tehsils. So public infrastructure or infrastructure finance, government infrastructure, okay, social infrastructure. My database says as of today, if at all we need to invest in public infrastructure, we require what? We require around 30 lakh crore rupees investment in public infrastructure to be done in next 5 years. And that would roughly create around 50 to 60 lakh jobs per annum, right from villages, tehsils to big cities. So India government has to decide what are its priorities. Its priorities are not to boost a few industrial houses, a few industrial groups, a few economic sectors. Its major priority is to invest in public infrastructure. Unless you invest in public infrastructure, ease of conducting business won't happen. Employment generation won't happen. GDP growth won't happen. But at the same time, we have to also see that there is a balancing act between investment in infrastructure and its commercial use. The blunder that was committed by countries like Indonesia or Malaysia in late 90s, those blunders we should not commit. What does it mean? On one side, we invest in public infrastructure, but there is no commercialization of infrastructure. There is no demand for the use of infrastructure. This is what exactly happened in Indonesia. And therefore, once upon a time, these Southeast Asian tigers who showed a kind of a fabulous rate of growth in GDP, okay, they started falling. Why? Because there was an imbalance between investment in infrastructure, its commercial use by the industry and the service sector. So those blunders should be avoided. But we have to look at public infrastructure very seriously. Our seventh response should be accurate execution of good salary for the unorganized sector. We all know not less than 60% of our employees are in the unorganized sector. And what are their salaries? Their salaries are peanuts. Forget retirement benefits. Forget safety and security for them. Forget medical insurance for them. These are all remote possibilities. I am talking about primarily good salary to be given to a worker in the unorganized sector. Okay, the northern belt of India, from West Bengal to Bihar to Uttar Pradesh to Haryana to Rajasthan. If at all I talk about this belt, I know I visit this belt very often. The average salary over there is pathetic. And why not to talk about the other states in the country? Some states offer good salaries, but then in those states you find industrial concentration. So why people from Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, or for that matter Orissa should come to Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu? Why we do not pay them good salaries, create jobs for them in the Bimaru states, in the 6 states? Things are changing, things are improving, but at a very slow pace, at a very slow rate. Why? Because we do not offer good salaries to the employees in unorganized sector. As I mentioned to you earlier, 60% of these people, 60% of our population, okay, if this 60% of our population is not uplifted economically, right, the slowdown in India would continue. Other countries may do better, but then we may continue with the slowdown even after Corona also. Our next response should be nullify political interference in the public sector enterprises. Friends, there has been a growing discussion, especially in last 2-3 years, that we should privatize insurance, we should privatize banking sector, we should privatize quite a few manufacturing companies in the public sector. My very simple statement here is all primary necessities of a common man should be under the control of a common man. If at all there is a political interference, bureaucratic interference in public sector enterprises and banks, and therefore public sector enterprises and banks are not doing well, then that should be nullified. Why should not we bring public sector enterprises under the control of public directly? Okay, I mean to say that the shares of public sector companies and banks should be given to public at large, which would give them a better investment avenue also. And we should create a kind of independent governing council without any political interference or bureaucratic interference. Why? Because public necessities, primary necessities, that is health, water, primary education, travel, energy, housing. Okay, all these are primary necessities. You can't privatize them. Okay, and there is no guarantee even after privatizing that there would be good amount of innovation, productivity, and a private company would offer its output products and services at an affordable price. There is enough evidence. There is the database evidence of economies of USA, economies of Britain, for that matter South Africa, I would even say Venezuela, Brazil, that privatization is not an answer to the management of public necessities. The better answer is public control. Create a business model, create a mechanism, a governance model that avoids political and bureaucratic interference, at the same time offers the productivity of private sector in a public sector enterprise. And this modeling is possible. This modeling can be done. The next response is introduce insurance at a cheaper rate for downtrodden people. As we just said 10 minutes back, there is no enough life insurance, medical insurance, educational insurance, insurance against loss of job, insurance against loss of revenue for small SMEs and kirana walas. There are no innovative insurance products. Those are available in India. Okay, so IRDA should look at insurance sector much more innovatively with social innovation. Introduce insurance at cheaper rate. Our present government has done some good amount of work in this area. I agree, but a lot more has to be done. Execution is what is lacking. Our next response should be rectify agricultural produce pricing, lending, insurance and infrastructure. We all know, as I made a statement, agriculture has been a very, very neglected area. You can imagine what was the price of 1 tola of gold, 10 grams of gold in 1970 compared to the price of an agricultural produce in 1970. If you compare and then come to 2020, where is the price of 10 grams of gold today and where is the price of an agricultural produce today? Agricultural produce comes under the list of necessities, but then necessities not just for the urban population, necessities are there for a poor farmer also. In India, almost 80% of farmers are poor. Their land holding is very small, and then they are not united. Therefore, we have to look at the business model, financing model, earning model, the operational management model of agriculture very seriously, very innovatively. Why we cannot think of creating agricultural cooperative societies? Why we can't think about a combination of a cooperative society and a corporate entity? I call it as cooperative corporate confederation, where you are combining the advantage of limited liability of a company and the advantage of one head, one vote in a cooperative structure. If these two are brought together, for the farmers to come together, I think that would cause a kind of a revolution in the agricultural sector. So friends, these are supposed to be our internal responses. Some of them are urgently to be done, are operational, and some of them are really strategic, would require good amount of time. But I, being an optimistic guy, I always believe in beginning of the beginning of the beginning. There has to be some beginning. Okay, so some people pessimistically would say, oh, would this reform be possible? Can farmers come together when they are divided by caste and creed, when they are divided politically? Yes, that's a fact, but we need to bring them together through a very convincing business model. And for that matter, we have to look at agriculture innovatively. So friends, now I go to the external responses to the global economic slowdown, where we have been not so innovative. We do not concentrate much, although we started with a great approach to managing our neighboring countries. We offered our friendship to USA, Russia, Japan, South Korea, even China. We offered our friendship, impartial friendship, to these members of the subcontinent. But then there was no consistency in our external responses to the global economic slowdown. And quite a few of them I have listed down here. Let us look at them one by one. Number one, make India a real manufacturing hub for global companies. And this can be clubbed with my second suggestion here, that there is a growing kind of distrust in China, especially by European countries and American countries, especially the countries led by USA. Now this becomes a golden opportunity for us. European companies, Australian companies, Japanese companies, American companies, which really want to replace China. Okay, now they are looking at Vietnam, Bangladesh, Myanmar. They're looking at smaller countries with smaller capacities. Why they should not look at India? But that comes back to our number one response. Are we really a very suitable manufacturing hub? What is our legislation, bureaucracy, comfort of conducting business, infrastructural facilities? A lot has to be done here. And that would be our great response to the companies from these developed nations who really want to replace China. And we are a democratic country. If you look at number of engineers, number of Indian engineers, number of Indian doctors, Indian chartered accountants, Indian MBAs, a big pool, big number, intelligent guys, but where are opportunities? So if you respond well to the global economy by offering something from our side, naturally India can become a manufacturing hub. Not only a manufacturing hub, we can become a service hub. Chinese Mandarin language was a hurdle for China in the service sector, communication sector, which China is overcoming very fast. Chinese guys, Chinese youth, Chinese people are learning European languages, American English, okay, South American English and English accent. Chinese youth are learning very fast. So in next couple of years time, they may even replace us in the service sector also. My third response is raise cheaper funds from Japan and offer Indian quality workforce to them. Friends, I am making an emotional statement here based on Indian mythology and culture. Gautam Buddha, he championed Buddhism in India. It went out to Japan. It went out to Mongolia, to some extent to China, Tibet, and then of course Thailand and many such countries. Now culturally, if India and Japan can be real friends, can be genuine friends, why should not we look at Japanese idle funds at a rate of interest, okay, a gross rate of interest including foreign exchange coverage between 3 and 4%, and Japanese population, okay, is what you call aging. Almost 30% of Japanese today are 60 plus in terms of age. Productivity is slow, productivity is low, And there we can really offer quality workforce, quality engineers, quality chartered accountants, quality doctors, quality workers to Japan, maybe for say next 2 decades. It could create a win-win situation between we and Japan, but it requires a kind of innovative model. Okay, how do we help Japan and how Japan should help us? My fourth response is improve barter business with friendly countries and reduce dependence on American dollar. Already it has been happening. Like, example between we and Iran, there is a good amount of barter that we import the Iranian crude oil and we offer the necessity commodities to Iran. But this can be extended to many such countries. This can be extended to Venezuela. This can be extended to South African countries. This can be extended to other South American countries so that we reduce our dependence on the American dollar. We all know in last 1.5 years time, Indian rupee has depreciated anything between 8 to 10%. It is a very alarming situation. It has impacted our imports very badly. It has impacted our children going abroad for their education very badly. Okay, and it has also impacted the lending mechanism, the rate of inflation in our country. A country's currency must be very strong, and that requires what? To a larger extent, we should conduct business in our own currency. If not in our own currency, I would say through a barter system. My fifth response is offer engineering, research and development, and finance professionals to the developing or poor African and Middle East countries. As I just said, we have many intelligent engineers, research and development engineers, finance professionals, MBAs, okay, quite a few of them. And these can be a good export to African countries and Middle East countries. Like I have quite a few friends. I have some clients from Middle East countries like Oman, UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. Even for that matter, I would say Egypt, Iran, Iraq. Okay. Now these countries, they respect we Indians a lot. Practically, operationally, we run their economies. We run economies of the oil producing countries. So why not to extend this model further? Almost 80 to 90 lakh of Indian workers and employees are there working in oil producing Gulf countries. This can be extended to African countries. This can be extended to South American countries. Okay, so our professional expertise is an exportable commodity, would create great jobs for us and would create an international pool. And this international pool, more we strengthen it, better would be our goodwill, and that would be greatly a kind of a weapon in our hand, okay, to restrict China from its geopolitical ambitions. My next response is improve agricultural productivity with the knowledge support from countries like Israel, Brazil, Germany, and South Korea. We have a great amount of cultivable land. Our farmers are really hardworking. What they need is guidance. They need support. They need innovation. They're what we have been lacking. Many political parties in India, for politicization, for political purpose, they always talk about agriculture, but they do not execute innovative agricultural ideas. Let us at least improve productivity in agricultural sector. We can take a lot of help from innovative countries like Israel, especially Germany and South Korea, and then Brazil. Next response should be exploit the WTO mechanism to improve exports to the developed economies. We should exploit WTO mechanism to its fullest extent, the way China has been doing. When Mr. Trump made a nationalist statement that we don't need WTO, we should withdraw from WTO, there was a contrary opposite statement made by Mr. Xi, the president of China. He said, no, we require WTO, we require global trade. Okay, if a head of a Chinese country, which is run through communist doctrines, okay, and maybe many other internal doctrines, can dare to make a statement like this. Why? Because China has been very successful during last 2 decades exploiting WTO mechanism. But that also requires internal support, bureaucratic support, internal infrastructural support. If these two are combined, India is in a solid position to exploit WTO mechanism, especially in next 5 to 10 years. My next response for India to the external economic slowdown, create strong political network to combat geopolitical threats from China. It has already impacted Chinese economy. Chinese, what you call goodwill, has eroded in last 4 to 5 years. And this is an opportunity for us. But this requires what? A very strong political network with those countries which are impacted by Chinese geopolitical ambitions, Chinese economic ambitions. We all know China has been working on one globe, one road, etc. And quite a few countries which have been, which got into this kind of a network are now realizing that this is a Chinese trap, Chinese lending trap, Chinese trap of dominance, and they want to come out of this trap. We must develop a political network so that we can check the geopolitical threats from China. My next suggestion here is renew and reinforce relations with Russia, Iran, Iraq, Sri Lanka, Mongolia, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia. Now, if you look at some of these countries, especially Russia, Iran, Iraq, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia, we have been importing crude oil from these countries, mostly from Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. Once upon a time, Russia was our close friend. We lost our friendship with Russia to a great extent. Why? Because we went closer to USA. Being closer to USA, no problem, but not at the cost of Russian friendship. And that is what we need to build up now. Russia can be our great friend. The friendship between Russia and China is a challenge for us. The way Russia has been transacting with China should be an alarming kind of a situation for us. We must renew our friendship with Russia. Russia should be our great friend, close neighbor, and therefore you remember the war of 1971. Our Prime Minister Indira Gandhi fought it heroically. But then Russia supported us. We can't forget history. You forget history, you get into problems. So we should renew and reinforce our relations with these countries. But then there again, I'm making a very frank statement here. We need to have a very innovative, progressive, economically progressive, culturally progressive approach to Islam. Okay, there are quite a few big countries, Islamic countries worldwide, and they require a kind of a guidance from us. Okay, we have 20 crore plus Muslims in India, and that is our big strength that we should politicize, that we should use for cultural economic advantage, and that requires an innovative approach to our entire reinforcement of relations with Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Mongolia, etc. My next response should be promote research and development in collaboration with South Korea, Germany, Taiwan, Britain. This list can be longer. As I mentioned earlier, we Indians are very good at jugaad. We are very good at public innovation, social innovation, local innovation, but there is no institutionalization that can convert the jugaad into a commercially viable research. Be it automobile industry, mining, steel, I would say medical equipments and medicines. You take any industry, every industry, you need good amount of research and development. And there we can collaborate with smaller countries like South Korea, for that matter, Taiwan, Britain, Germany. Okay, and I would say, if at all I want to add to the list, I may even bring Venezuela here. I may bring Brazil here. I may bring Australia here. A lot of R&D is happening in Australian universities, and we do not collaborate. As I mentioned earlier, constant research and development, constant efforts of breakthrough innovation can boost the economy. A lot of R&D is possible in our social economy, domestic economy, okay, economy for the agriculture that is there in villages. A lot of R&D is possible. Companies which manufacture tractors, okay, irrigation equipments, they've been doing a lot on R&D, but we need to institutionalize it. Okay, we want more public participation in R&D. My next response is be a grain exporter to countries like Japan, China, Britain, Saudi Arabia, and enrich our farmers through collective cooperative farming, as I earlier said. Surprisingly, in India, we do not have a national policy of agricultural integration. And therefore, what we find in a year when price of sugar goes up, Okay, farmers rush for sugarcane farming, and then there is a bigger supply than demand, and the price of sugar terribly falls, and there is a kind of a disequilibrium between demand and supply. This must stop. We should have a national integrated policy, okay, not coercive policy. Now this can be participative policy, transparent policy if farmers come together. So there is a group of farmers, there's a group of consumers, there's a group of small kirana walas, and all these three are pulled together, okay, for the betterment of agricultural sector as such. Now, if you have a proper pricing policy, a proper policy of exporting grains to countries which can be our natural friends, I think that should create good revenue for us, good revenue for our farmers. Okay. Number 12, improve global service centers in India for poor African and poor Asian countries and create employment for Indian diploma holders. We are a great country, we are a big country. We can create many global service centers. This can be automobile service centers, banking service centers. This can be, I would say, even agricultural research service centers. Okay, so we can create global service centers in India, and that should generate good amount of employment for Indian youth. And who should be our target? Poor African countries and Asian countries. We should offer them our services at an affordable price. This would be of a geopolitical advantage also to us. Okay, this is what China doing. China is working on its great Chinese dream through both soft and hard approaches to the poor African and Asian countries. Where is our presence? Our presence is negligible. Okay, my next response is improve domestic water management, river compositions, using technologies from countries like Canada, Russia, China, and Germany. We have many good rivers, but what is our river management, water management? We have a monsoon-based kind of agriculture, almost 90%. We depend so much on monsoon. Okay, so much of water is being wasted. Now, the irrigation, the rains which we have in Mumbai are almost 85 to 90% wasted. They go back to the Arabian Ocean. Okay, so there is no approach, there is no innovative approach here, there is no vision here. We talk a lot about water management. Okay, there are political statements made, environmental statements made, but we are much way behind. If at all, I compare with the water management done in China. The water resource management in China is so great, is so innovative that China is working on its possible water problems of 2050. That is what is a vision. We have been talking about Chinese communism, Communist Party of China. We criticize it, but then we neglect, we do not look at the Chinese vision, and that vision is what is lacking here. Okay, we have Ganga, we have Yamuna, we have Narmada, Kaveri, Krishna, we have Godavari. We have so many great rivers. Okay, these rivers are for a spiritual purpose, religious purpose for a common Indian, and not so much for the purpose of water management. We have to look at water management very seriously, public participation, awareness, and so on. If at all we improve domestic water management, that should improve our agriculture, that should improve our what you call urban dwellings, village systems, and so on. My next response is rearrange South Asia relations for our regional economics. What is our relationship with Sri Lanka today? Nepal, Bhutan, even I would say for that matter, Pakistan, Bangladesh, forget Pakistan, but what is our relationship with Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bangladesh? Okay, it is not so good, not so comfortable. And then Southeast Asia relations with countries like Vietnam, Thailand, for that matter, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore. Okay, if at all we want to be a regional hub, a regional power, we have to look at South Asia relations and Southeast Asia relations. We need a long-term strategy here. If at all we want to combat the Chinese threat. My next and last response is be a global center of education and tourism at a reasonable cost to developing poor and small countries. Okay, so the travelers from developed nations, they come to India in a good number. They spend dollars and yens here, yuan here, euros here. But what about people from developing poor and small countries. We should also welcome them, and that would expand our tourism industry and education industry both. Even I can add medical industry also, if at all I call it as medical industry. My hometown Solapur in South Maharashtra is a small city, but it has become a medical town for the patients, people from North Karnataka and South Maharashtra. And added to that, there is a spiritual tourism. There is a religious tourism in my hometown. Now, this concept requires an innovative business model, infrastructure. We can offer quality education at an affordable price to Africans and Asians. And some private education institutions in India, they have been offering this for years together. Why not to institutionalize it? It would generate a good amount of friendship, create a friendship. It would generate foreign exchange for us, job opportunities for Indian youth, and there are furthermore advantages in terms of developing our own infrastructure. So if you create business, business supports infrastructure, infrastructure supports business. So friends, these are the external responses. Now I conclude my presentation here. We need to look at New India, which our respected Prime Minister has been talking about. Okay, what is New India for me? If at all I look at our economy, our responses to global slowdown. India, INDIA. Now India here, I should stand for innovation. We should work a lot on patents, product patents, process patents. Our patent giving infrastructure should be improved. Let me share with you, my one application for a patent is pending for now more than 10 years. I am already 59 plus. I do not know when will I get my patent. So we need to work on innovation. There has to be a mechanism of innovation centers in villages and towns, spending on innovation. N stands for networking. We require systems of networking, social networking, business networking, economic networking, entrepreneurial networking. Okay, we only talk about religious networking, spiritual networking, political networking. We need to talk about economic networking. We require a lot of discipline, good amount of legislation, but legislation not at the cost of ease of conducting business. Okay, we have good amount of legislation. What is not there is, okay, execution. Our execution is bad. There are criminal cases, civil cases, economic offense cases pending for more than 10-20 years. And therefore, we want to look at business discipline, business process discipline. That includes, of course, the legal discipline. I stands for information. Information, when I say information, information about knowledge sharing, capabilities. We spoke about this. Capabilities are of our employees, are our entrepreneurs, consultants, chartered accountants, doctors. A lot can be done here, especially workers. And that too, capabilities of workers from the unorganized sector. A lot of work has to be done here. And what is last? A stands for action orientation, support and promotion. What a farmer wants from our government, action orientation. Okay, what a Kirana wala SME wants, action orientation. What an educational institution like our institute, ICAI, what we want from the government, action orientation. Okay, what is lacking in India is action orientation. We have great philosophies, we have a great heritage, we have a great historical background. Okay, the depth of our economy is great. Our population is very productive. 60% of our population is youth. All these are great advantages, but these great advantages can be converted into an economic advantage provided we work on action orientation. So friends, I should close my presentation here. I should share with you my new book is coming out with the title Economics of Survival. I have discussed, after studying 14 economies worldwide, their problems, their challenges, their potentials, and many other things. I have come out with many new ideas, maybe I would say new economic modeling, new economic doctrines. While I work on this book, I could see that even the definition of a concept like poverty, the development index of a country, I would say equilibrium within the sectors of an economy, all these concepts are to be revisited. They require new definitions. they require a new approach. And that is what I have attempted through my book, Economics of Survival. So friends, let us again thank our institute that give me this opportunity to talk to you. So let us think over the points which I shared with you. Corona has given us a reasonable amount of time. Okay, for what? To be introvert. Let us be productively looking at our own strengths and weaknesses. Can we convert our weaknesses into strength? Can we convert our challenges into opportunities? That is what we are here supposed to look at. India, no doubt, is a powerful country. We have been very hardworking people. We look at innovation as part of our daily culture. Our villagers innovate a lot. But then, as I made a mention earlier, this has to be structured well. This has to be structured into a workable business model, economic model. So with this, friends, I in my presentation here, I repeat my WhatsApp number. Those who want to contribute to my discussion or share some ideas with me or some questions as such, my WhatsApp number is 98200 62116. 98200 62116. I also request those who are keen on reading about our background of innovation, please also read my book with the title Krishna Niti. The title looks different, but Krishna Niti, my book is available in English, Marathi and Hindi, available on Amazon. It talks about Indian innovation way back, which was existing 4,000 to 5,000 years back. And I always make a statement, the first Indian innovator, if at all you ask me, was Lord Krishna himself. So once again, friends, I thank our institute. I thank the Committee on International Affairs and our friends from the committee, and look forward to a similar such useful session with you. Thank you very much. All the best to all of you.